Since 2015, Jared Stillman has rocked Nashville sports.
That team freaking stinks.
And now he's back. The takes are hotter than ever.
I mean, let's be honest, he just can't coach.
Welcome to Stillman and Company.
Stillman and Company on the 440 Sports Network, as always, here today. Again, the Stillman and Co. YouTube page. Like and subscribe. And if you're listening on the podcast, later today in the day, I've actually been playing a lot with the analytics. Being on Apple Podcasts has been a huge plus. I've been playing with the analytics of what the podcast stuff is saying. And basically just like and subscribe there too. And like and subscribe everywhere. If it makes you feel better, it's better for the show. And again, 440 Sports right here. Tons of great programming. Like and subscribe to 440 Sports as well. So, I want to start the show off today on something that I teased yesterday. And I will be honest in saying that I think I'm kind of playing to the people a little bit. If I have to be completely frank. Because the Titans have played 2 games. They're 0-2. And today, we are unveiling the first ever Jared Stillman 2026 coaching big board. So, if you're watching on the stream, we've got the big board right here. Let me get the little Vanna White right here. We've got the big board right here. Who should be the top candidates to replace Brian Callahan? Now, I put out a tweet on Twitter at Jared Stillman. And I said, who do you want to coach the Titans next year? And there was a lot of crazy stuff, a lot of John Gruden, who once again is not going to be hired into another NFL job. It's not going to happen. So you should just, as he's suing the NFL, just move on from Gruden. But I was surprised. There was some Mike Tomlin on there. There was a couple of Kyle Shanahans on there. Although I don't know if you guys saw what Kyle Shanahan did with Mac Jones the other day. I don't think Kyle Shanahan's going anywhere. So, we're going to, for the first time ever, we're going to have the Stillman and Company head coaching big board. And later in the program, I do have like a more immediate topic, which is about the current football team, because I do feel like there is something that is not totally fair as far as a criticism of the current Titans that both the fans and the media are jumping on. But let's have some fun. Let's talk about who the next head coach of the Tennessee Titans should be. Think of this not as a Jared Stillman says this is who they should hire, but think of this as Mel Kiper Jr.'s big board when it comes to the draft, with all of the draft prospects. Again, he'll put out a big board in the middle of the college football season, and then guys will play well and they'll go up, and guys will play poorly and they'll go down. And then there's the combine, and then there's pro days, and then there's what Mel's hearing, and then he moves them all around, and then on the final day before the draft, it's his final big board. Well, that's what we're doing today. This is the first edition of the Stillman and Company 2026 Tennessee Titans head coaching big board. Now, let me be frank with everybody. There is absolutely nothing that I'm going to do as far as what can happen this season. Like, if you think that they're just going to go hire John Gruden this season and put him in there, that's not going to happen. No matter what happens, you're stuck with Brian Callahan's coaching staff. So none of that matters. You can't get past the Rooney Rule. You cannot hire your next head coach until the start of next season, or really the end of this season. So this is about the 2026 Tennessee Titans. And without further ado, let's start with the number 1 selection on the, should we call this the coaching board 1.0? Let's start with the number 1 selection. This would be my hands down choice that if this person would take the job, I would say, let's do it. And that person is Nick Saban. I put his designation right now as ESPN, but Nick Saban is at ESPN. And I put Saban on the big board because if Nick Saban expressed 1 ounce of interest in returning to the NFL or coaching Cam Ward, I would do it in a heartbeat. If Nick Saban picked up the phone and called somebody he knew through his old Oiler days, if he picked up the phone And he called his buddy Steve Watterson, the old strength and conditioning coach. And he said, Steve, I don't want anybody to know this, but I want to coach the Titans. I want to coach that Cam Ward. I'm sick and tired of being on TV. Do you think you can relay that message to the owner? If I was the owner, I would immediately say Nick Saban's got the job. Do I need to go over the resume? Probably not when it comes to Nick Saban. As far though, the one thing I guess I'll discuss is, for as bad as everybody said Nick Saban was in the NFL, he was 15-17. This idea that Saban was just god awful in the NFL is not true. He had a winning record his first year. Brian Callahan is god awful. He's 3-16. So Nick Saban's not really a choice, but he's on the list simply because if Nick Saban wanted to be a choice, he would go right to the top. So that's number one. Number two, and this is, if you had to ask me today, Jared, who is going to be the coach of the Tennessee Titans in 2026, this would be my answer. Matt Nagy, offensive coordinator of the Kansas City Chiefs. As we know, Matt Nagy spent 4 years as the head coach of the Chicago Bears, and he was 34-31 with 2 playoff appearances, 2018 and 2020. They did not make it in 2019 or in 2021. But he did that with Mitch Trubisky as his starting quarterback. Now, I always say this when it comes to coaching hires, because any head coach will say, I'll work with that guy to get any job unless it's a guy who has real options. So Jim Harbaugh specifically chose to go to the LA Chargers because they had Justin Herbert. But quite often you'll see a guy that's a decent coaching candidate who's looking for his shot who will say, I'll go coach Daniel Jones. I'll go coach Schumacher. I want to coach Anthony Richardson. I want it. And they do that because they just want the job. It's 1 of 32. Then you get there, you blame the quarterback, and then you get your own quarterback, which is what happened with Nagy in Chicago. He inherited Trubisky. He won with Trubisky. Trubisky was a bum. Then they drafted Fields. Then Fields wasn't good enough, fast enough, so they fired him. Matt Nagy, since Chicago, has been the OC under Andy Reid in Kansas City, where they've won a couple of Super Bowls, and they've made another. He's got head coaching experience. And not only does he have head coaching experience, but he actually has not bad head coaching experience. When he was in Chicago, and this matters to me, I don't know how much this matters to you, but when he was in Chicago, one thing that he did that I absolutely loved was Matt Nagy would hire defensive coordinators whom he could just farm that side of the ball to. Vic Fangio, Chuck Pagano, those were his defensive coordinators. Andy Reid, we talk about Brian Callahan, and we talk about the fact that, well, Brian Callahan's trying to call plays and be the head coach at the same time. You know, Andy Reid doesn't have that problem. You know why? Because Steve Spagnuolo runs the defense, period. Sean McVay doesn't have that problem because his defensive coordinator, whether it's Wade Phillips or Brandon Staley or Raheem Morris, they handle it. So that gives me hope that if Matt Nagy were to come in here and be the head coach of the Titans, I already know he can be a head coach because he was 34-31 in Chicago. And I know he can be a head coach and give the defense to somebody else. Also, no disrespect to Matt Nagy and no disrespect to Mitch Trubisky, but I never liked Trubisky as a prospect, and I certainly think Cam Ward is a much, much, much more talented player. Now, I am not hiring a coach to go with Cam Ward. Many of you will do that, and they will do that. I am not. I am hiring the best head coach available. But I think about this with Matt Nagy, and I'm using Todd Bowles from last night as the example. Everybody thought Todd Bowles sucked when he was the coach of the Jets. I remember the back page of the New York tabloids after they lost to the Browns, who hadn't won a game in a year and a half, and the back headline read, Toilet Bowls, and then spelled it Bowles. And everybody thought Todd Bowles sucked. Well, Todd Bowles leaves the Jets, a shit organization, and it seems like Todd Bowles can coach. Kind of like their quarterbacks. They leave the Jets and then, oh, wait a minute, they're starters in the NFL. I kind of feel the same way about Chicago. That doesn't mean that I think everybody who was a coach in Chicago, I don't want Matt Eberflus, he won't be on the coaching board. But I kind of think 34-31 as head coach of the Bears for Matt Nagy, I think that's pretty impressive. He's number 2 on the list. Number 3, and there were a couple of people who suggested this when it came to the tweet I put out earlier today saying, hey, who do you want to be the next head coach of the Titans? Number 3 is Todd Monken. He is the offensive coordinator of the Baltimore Ravens. And if I owned the Titans and I was making the call, this would probably be the first call that I would make. Now, once again, if Nick Saban wants to be the head coach of the Titans, he can have it. But going over realistic candidates, Monken might be my top choice, again, without knowing their personalities. And having a grasp on somebody's personality is probably the most important thing as to whether or not they're going to be a good head coach. So this is all kind of silly anyways. And when fans talk about, I want this coach, I want that coach, it's kind of silly without sitting down and interviewing these guys. But Todd Monken would have a really good shot at the job if I owned the Tennessee Titans. And here's why. Todd Monken does have head coaching experience, albeit in college at Southern Miss. But that's still head coaching experience. Now, head coaching experience isn't the most important thing to me, but it certainly helps that you've proven that, hey, you know how to run an organization. The second thing is Todd Monken has a ton of offensive coordinator experience in the NFL. He was with Jameis Winston in Tampa Bay. Then he was with Baker Mayfield in Cleveland. Now he's been with Lamar Jackson. And in between, he won national championships with Stetson Bennett as the starting quarterback at Georgia. If you can run an offense with Stetson Bennett and win a title, and then the next year run an offense with Lamar Jackson and have him either be the league MVP or pretty damn close to league MVP, chances are you probably know what you're doing as far as offensive football is concerned. And the other thing about Todd Monken is this. The only reason he doesn't already have a job is because he's 59 years old. And in the NFL, everybody wants the Sean McVay. Everybody wants the tight pants, the big play sheet, the latte. They want the 37-year-old who may or may not be married. They don't want the old guy. But Todd Monken is not Pete Carroll. Again, he's 59. To me, I think that's a pretty good age to be a head coach. Todd Monken, number 3 on the list, coming from Baltimore. Number 4 is Arthur Smith, the offensive coordinator in Pittsburgh. And if Arthur hadn't previously been offensive coordinator of the Titans, then I'm not sure if Arthur would be on the list. But I'm not ready to give up on Arthur Smith just yet. Arthur went to Atlanta. And when he went to Atlanta, they were in a transition rebuild period, like it or not. They had that Super Bowl team from 2016 with Matt Ryan and Julio Jones, and they kept pushing and pushing and pushing. They kept chasing that 28-3 lead, that 25-point lead. They kept chasing it. Arthur gets there, and immediately once Arthur Smith gets there, Julio Jones leaves. Now, Julio was done, but Julio leaves. Then there was the fallout with Matt Ryan, which again wasn't Arthur Smith's fault. That was Arthur Blank's fault because they pursued Deshaun Watson and they thought they were going to get Deshaun Watson. And then Matt Ryan was like, I think it may be time for me to take a break here. So then he had a year where he had to scramble with Mariota as his quarterback. Now, the one red flag with Arthur Smith in Atlanta for me was the whole Desmond Ridder fiasco. They drafted Desmond Ridder, I believe, in the 3rd round of the 22 draft. Mariota was the starting quarterback. He got benched midway through the year. Ridder went in at the end, and Ridder played okay. So they go into the next year with Ridder as their guy, which I was a little nervous of. When I was doing the quarterback carousels, I was saying, I think I might get a backup option. In fact, the guy that I circled and said, this should be the backup in Atlanta was Baker Mayfield. And then somebody told me, somebody with the Titans told me, I don't see Arthur and Baker getting along. So then I said Sam Darnold. And if they had Sam Darnold, Arthur might still be the head coach in Atlanta, because he would have benched Ritter for Darnold instead of benching Ritter for Taylor Heineke and losing all those games. But the truth is, as long as you don't do the Desmond Ritter thing again, and when you have Cam Ward as your quarterback, I have a hard time believing you're going to do the Desmond Ritter thing again. I'd like to give Arthur another shot. I thought Arthur was great as the offensive coordinator here. I know many people who know Arthur, who've worked with Arthur. I don't know Arthur that well, but I know a lot of people who do, and they really, really, really like Arthur Smith. And he's done well in Pittsburgh so far. Granted, it's 2 games into the season with Rodgers, but he did well last year with Russell, and I'm not willing to give up on Arthur Smith. Maybe a lot of you are. I'm not. Arthur Smith, number 4 on the coaching big board. Number 5, and this is a name that a lot of you have liked, Kliff Kingsbury, the offensive coordinator of the Washington Commanders. Now, I have a real problem with Kliff Kingsbury. And my problem with Kliff Kingsbury as the next head coach of the Tennessee Titans is that Kliff Kingsbury has been a head coach in multiple places and has been a pretty crappy head coach. He was bad in college, and he was bad at Arizona. He was 35-40 at Texas Tech, and that was with primarily Patrick Mahomes as his quarterback. That's bad. Again, I know Mahomes and Kingsbury put up 9,000 points a game, but you're the head coach. And the expectation with you as the head coach is that you're going to win some football games. And then in Arizona, Kliff Kingsbury was 28-37-1 with 1 playoff appearance. Now, just because you weren't good in your first start does not mean that you will be good at your second place. For instance, Mike Mularkey had a terrible record. And I thought the circumstances were, hey, Buffalo's kind of a disaster. Jacksonville was a disaster. He was there for 1 year and a new owner came in. And I thought Mike Mularkey was a good coach. And so when that wasn't really his fault, the record reflected that, but he actually could coach. And maybe Kliff Kingsbury's the same way. And I am not dismissing what he did last year with Jaden Daniels and Washington's kind of patched together offense. You know, they went out and signed a bunch of free agents, but outside of Biotish, the center, they didn't sign any big ticket free agents. It was all just kind of piecing it here and there. Like what you're doing with Tyler Lockett. It was a lot of just piecing it here and there, and they were fantastic last year. And so when it comes to Kliff Kingsbury, I have a hard time getting over the Texas Tech thing. I have a hard time getting over the Arizona thing. But I'm also not going to dismiss the Washington thing, which I think has been pretty freaking impressive. And so when you put up those results that he put up last year as the offensive coordinator with a young quarterback whose profile is different, but a little similar to Cam's, you get put on the list. Kliff Kingsbury is number 5. And finally, number 6, Mike McCarthy. He would be, if we're not counting Nick Saban, he would probably be the top quote-unquote free agent on the market. Mike McCarthy has a Super Bowl. And regardless of whether or not he's a good coach, I mean, Barry Switzer has a Super Bowl and he's not a good coach, but regardless as to whether or not he's a good coach, that does mean something when you've got a Super Bowl. So he was 174, 112, and 2 as an NFL head coach. 12 trips to the playoffs in 18 years. Here's the one thing when it comes to McCarthy that I do see as a positive. Mike McCarthy has worked in some of the most unique circumstances in the entire NFL. The Green Bay Packers do not have an owner, which means the head coach and the general manager and the team president all kind of work together on building that operation. That is very unique. There is no having to save face to the owner. There is no yes sir, no ass to kiss. There is none of that. And then Mike McCarthy left Green Bay and he went to Dallas, which is the exact opposite of Green Bay, where the single most important thing that you do is not win football games, devise a great scheme, have a great culture. It is kiss the owner's ass. And Mike McCarthy, I thought, was very good at kissing Jerry Jones's ass. Now, again, when it comes to picking a head coach, I'm not looking at kissing Jerry Jones's ass as a reason that I would say, hey, let's go ahead and hire Mike McCarthy to be the next head coach of the Titans. But it tells me that he can at least kind of read the room. Again, I don't know what Chad Brinker thinks of him, and since Brinker would probably be making the call, Brinker would have a great feel for McCarthy since they were both together in Green Bay. I also don't think McCarthy is a moron, and I think that the fact that Mike McCarthy's overweight kind of gives people that impression. Between that and the way Aaron Rodgers treated him in Green Bay, it probably gave the impression that Mike was some sort of Santa Claus on the sideline with his giant Waffle House menu just going, ho, ho, ho. But the truth is Mike McCarthy can coach. Now, he's not a great coach, but he can coach. I think of him like Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn seemed like kind of a bozo, but he's done it enough to where you at least have to say, hey, Dan Quinn can coach. Might not be the best coach, but he can coach. So those are the top 6 candidates right now. And this will change. If the Ravens offense completely falls apart, then Todd Monken goes off the board. If the Steelers with Aaron Rodgers turn into an unmitigated disaster, the way that the Jets turned into a disaster last year, then they go off the board. So I am just sitting here saying that right now the Jared Stillman 2026 Coaching Board 1.0, Nick Saban number 1, and again, that's if Nick Saban wanted to do it, Nick Saban would go right to the top of the list. Matt Nagy number 2, Todd Monken in Baltimore number 3, Arthur Smith in Pittsburgh number 4, Kliff Kingsbury in Washington number 5, and Mike McCarthy, a free agent, number 6. Now, there is a 7th one that I put on the list. And at first I was thinking, okay, what college coaches would make sense for the NFL? But like the first name that popped into my head was Kirby Smart. You know, would Kirby Smart want to leave college to go to the pros? And then I saw that Kirby was making $13 million a year. And I'm like, you know what? Kirby might bitch about NIL every day. Kirby is not leaving. He is absolutely not leaving Georgia at $13 million a year to coach Titans. And the Titans are not going to pay a coach $13 million. So if you're going to hire a college coach, it has to either be a young up-and-comer or somebody that just wants out of NIL. Somebody that's like, I have had enough. And instead of being paid $8 million to coach college, pay me $7 million to coach the NFL. So the one college name I put on the list, and maybe I'm a homer for this, but the one college name I put on the list, Clark Lee at Vanderbilt. And here's why I put Clark Lee on the list. Again, I originally had Kirby on the list, but then I saw, Kirby's making $13 million, so no thank you. The key for a college coach that goes to the NFL is not, are they a good motivator? Are they a good game strategist? Are they a good... That's not it. It's, can you recognize that if you go to the NFL, it's not about you? If you go to the NFL, it's about who your star player is or who your star players are. You have to manage the operation. And a lot of these college coaches try to control the operation. Clark Lee said something to me that I've actually believed for a long time, and I never thought about it until he articulated it to me. But he said to me one time, he's like, control is an illusion. And he's right. And I think that's something that if you want to be an NFL head coach, you have to recognize you just don't have a lot of control. So, I have no idea how much money Clark Lee makes at Vanderbilt or if he'd want to go to the NFL. But at Vanderbilt right now, he's got a coach with a personality. He's got a quarterback with a personality. He's got a quarterback making money. He's got assistant coaches that have a lot of leeway on the offensive side of the ball. And he is smart, and he is self-aware, and he's a good ball coach. I think he'd put together a good NFL staff, and he's not likely to get a look, but I'd put him on the list. And by the way, for everybody that would say, Clark Lee, there's two things. Number one, the first honorable mention, and Clark's an honorable mention on this list too. The first honorable mention on the list is Jesse Minter, the defensive coordinator of the LA Chargers. He's an honorable mention on the list. That's not funny, is it? I mean, Jesse Minter won a national title in college. He's been running the Chargers defense under Harbaugh. That would not be some out-of-the-bag, holy shit, why'd you hire that guy? Jesse Minter was Clark Lee's DC at Vanderbilt. He, by the way, is an honorable mention. Doug Peterson, former head coach, Philadelphia and Jacksonville. I'm not a huge Doug Peterson guy. Doug Peterson is an honorable mention. And I put Robert Saleh on the list as a potential honorable mention. And here's why I put Robert Saleh on the list. Because I know what you're thinking. Robert Saleh was a total freaking dope. And it was the way that the Jets, it was a total disaster. And I agree. But again, so was Todd Bowles. So was Geno Smith. And I know Geno sucked last night, but so was Geno Smith. So was Sam Darnold. What do they all have in common? They left the Jets. That's what they have in common. Darnold went to the Jets. He had success his second year in Carolina. Had success in Minnesota. So, again, he's not at the top of my list. But if Robert Saleh interviewed well, and you could explain to me that, hey, it was the Jets that fucked everything up, then I think I would at least listen to the conversation. So that is our Stillman and Company Coaching Board 1.0. For all you people out there that are saying, oh my God, we need to hire, there you go. And if Nick Saban wants a job, Nick Saban can have the job. Now, I'm going to do this, which I don't always do, but I am going to get into some of your reaction here. And I can't keep up with all of it, but we'll get into some of your reaction. Adam in Portland says, Jim Schwartz. I think Jim's days as a head coach are behind him. Now, the one thing I did not include on this list is I did not include the current NFL head coaches who may or may not get fired. So a lot of people are talking about Mike Tomlin as being a potential hire. I would absolutely put Mike Tomlin on the list. Where would I put Mike Tomlin? I don't know, but he would be on the list. But Mike Tomlin currently isn't available. So there will be coaches that get fired. Again, 7 coaches get fired on average every year. Brian Callahan is getting fired. So that means 6 coaches around the league on average are going to be available. A lot of people are talking about Mike McDaniel and whether or not that would be a good fit. Again, I'm just kind of going through the chat, and a lot of people in the chat are talking about Mike McDaniel. I have no interest in Mike McDaniel. Now, I don't want to discredit the fact that I don't think that Mike McDaniel is the reason that the Dolphins have completely fallen apart. First of all, I think Tua stinks, and everybody who listens to me knows that. Number 2, I think their general manager, Chris Greer, I think he stinks. And I think the owner this year has decided to tank. They've spent no money. They let all of their free agents go. They gave away Jonnu Smith and Jalen Ramsey. Again, I think they are trying to tank with Tua as opposed to the past, which was tank for Tua. That being said, Mike McDaniel just doesn't do it for me. And I think it goes back to when they played the Titans on Monday Night Football 2 years ago. And I watched that Hard Knocks in season with the Dolphins. And I was just so turned off by Mike McDaniel. I was turned off by his attitude. I was turned off by the way that he talked to the players in the facility like he had to curse all the time like he was on their level. I was even turned off by the fact that Mike McDaniel, it was all about how nice his car was, and he was always wearing Gucci, and he was always wearing designers in the building. And I'm like, dude, where's your Dolphins hoodie? Like, be a ball coach. I like ball coaches. I don't see McDaniel as a ball coach. I'm not interested in McDaniel. Another guy who would be up on the list if he were available is Kevin Stefanski. Because how much of the disaster in Cleveland is Cleveland's fault? Ricky says, so unserious having Nick Saban at number 1. Really? You mean to tell me if Nick Saban wanted to coach the Tennessee Titans, you would have no interest in Nick Saban coaching the Titans. Again, what did I preface the entire Saban discussion with? If Saban wants to do it. I said I don't think it's very realistic. But again, if I own the Titans and Nick Saban called up and said, hey, I'd like to coach a team, I would do it. And there are very few college coaches that I would say, hey, this guy could coach in the NFL and I'd be cool with it. And Saban's one of them. Because Saban has NFL experience. And I think Saban has mellowed out some over the last 20 years, which I think he needs. Michael says, the Titans have a first-year general manager, and he's not going to fire the coach this year. He's going to let him take the blame for whatever goes bad and fire him at the end of the year. That's how the NFL works. First of all, the general manager, and this is something that maybe I'll do a whole topic on later in the week, because I saw a Facebook post that I even thought about screenshotting and putting into a graphic and putting up here on the board a Facebook post about Mike Borgonzi's offseason. Mike Borgonzi is the general manager in title only. Chad Brinker runs the Tennessee Titans. Period. These people are like, the general manager wouldn't want to fire the guy. He doesn't have a say. The general manager usually doesn't have a say when it comes to firing the coach. That's usually the owner. And here, the general manager absolutely doesn't get a say. The general manager has a boss whose job is football. This isn't like, say, the Predators, where Barry Trotz's boss is Sean Henry. But Sean Henry is not a hockey guy and is not trying to be one. His boss with Mike Borgonzi is Chad Brinker, who is a football guy. So it gets me all worked up when people talk about, oh, yeah, the general manager Borgonzi signed Dan Moore. According to the tweet from Adam Schefter, it was Brinker who signed Dan Moore. I don't even know why Borgonzi took the job other than the title and the money. And maybe the money's worth it. Maybe Chad Brinker said, hey, you'll really run the show here. But from what I've been told is I have been told that those two do not see eye to eye. Sean says, Robert Saleh is my favorite name mentioned. He'd have to sell me on his OC name, but he's my number one right now. Again, let Todd Bowles be an example. Let Geno Smith and Sam Darnold be examples. Maybe it's the Jets. Maybe it's the Jets. Maybe it's the Jets and maybe it's not him. TJ says Matt Nagy and Mike McCarthy is a joke. Why is Matt Nagy a joke? Matt Nagy is the offensive coordinator for the 3-time defending AFC champions. He's got 2 Super Bowl rings as an offensive coordinator. They just went to the Super Bowl last year, and he's 34-31 as a head coach with Mitchell Trubisky as his quarterback. How would Matt Nagy be a bad idea? In fact, like I said, gun to my head today, if the Titans were hiring a coach, I think it would either be Nagy or McCarthy. Nagy or McCarthy. And here's why. Because I don't really know who calls the shots with the Titans. Chad Brinker is Mike Borgonzi's boss. How much does Chad Brinker let Mike Borgonzi decide? I felt like, just based off the conversations I had, that Chad Brinker let Mike Borgonzi decide a lot. Apparently, what I've heard recently is those two are not seeing eye to eye. I don't know. But if it were a Mike Borgonzi hire, Matt Nagy is easily the number one name that you would think of. The Kansas City connection, the playbook for Mahomes and the way to coach Mahomes and what you could do with Cam Ward. That's the easiest one. And then with McCarthy, it's the relationship with Brinker, the fact he's been a head coach, he's been a good head coach, he's been an offensive head coach. And he probably wouldn't cost a bunch of money like maybe some of these other guys would. The guy I would be really interested in, I would interview all these guys. And I would interview them honestly. And other than Saban's the one who's like, you want the job? Sold. But everybody else, Like Arthur Smith. I don't know Arthur very well, but I'm not ready to give up on Arthur. I am not ready to give up on Arthur. Matthew says promote Denard Wilson to be the head coach of the Tennessee Titans. Based off of what? Denard Wilson is the most overrated Titans coordinator I think they have ever had. The defense is not good. And yet it's like, make him head coach. Based off of what? Give me a break. So that right there. And we will do this as we continue throughout the course of the year. That is the Stillman and Company Coaching Board 1.0, the potential replacements for Brian Callahan. Now, I am going to defend Brian Callahan here for a second, and I am going to defend Bill Callahan, if I may. The Titans have allowed 11 sacks in the first 2 games, and the fans and the media are restless. And Brian Callahan had to answer about that yesterday. Here's what he said.
11 sacks in the first 2 games. How much of a concern is the pass pro right now?
Yeah, again, we've been down this road, I think, before, and I don't mean to be dismissive of your question, but I think that, as I've said a million times, that sacks are an offensive problem. They're not an offensive line problem. Felt like a handful of our sacks were avoidable. One of the sacks is Cam running out of the pocket and taking a 2-yard loss, outside the pocket, which isn't an offensive line thing. I think a lot gets made of sacks being an offensive line stat. And while I'm not dismissing the fact that we got to play better up front. That's certainly not the case. But the sack thing is an entire equal parts problem. We've had 2 or 3 pressures and sacks come off of some running back protection things. It's not just them. And so the number in and of itself is concerning. Don't like that number. Don't want to have that. That's not going to help us win any football games. But I do think there's an extra onus that gets put on our offensive line based on what's happened here before and how it's looked, that the sacks are all on them. There's 11 sacks, and oh my God, that looks terrible. I think it's a little more nuanced than that, and I think there's more things that can be done to help from quarterback perspective, from receiver perspective, from running back perspective. So it's an everybody issue that we don't just pin the blame on them. We got to be better everywhere on offense, I think, for that number to improve.
Okay, so a lot of people are going to hear that, and they're going to think that's excuse-making from Callahan, because that's the way Callahan has answered a lot of questions over the year, which is in the last year and a half or so, which is, let me give a full explanation saying that it's really not as bad as it seems. But no, Callie, no. We have allowed 11 sacks in the first 2 games, and that is atrocious, and that stinks. And what happened to Bill Callahan, who was supposed to fix it? So I'm going to defend them. And then I'm going to rip their asses. We'll start with the defense. Number 1, guys, calm down. All I see, all I hear, all I read, Gentry Estes wrote about this in the Tennessean, is about how unimpressed with the offensive line everyone is through 2 games. And I think that's just unfair. There's this sentiment of, here we go again. You spent the money on Dan Moore. You've used 2 top 11 picks on that line. You spent the money on Lloyd Cushenberry. You brought in Kevin Zeitler, and the line still sucks. Again, I think that's unfair. And a lot of people are blaming the coach, and they're blaming the offensive line coach, Bill Callahan. And here's why it's unfair. Guys, it's been 2 games, one of which featured a backup tackle. They played a road game in their first game at Denver, one of the hardest, if not the hardest place to play in the NFL. From a silent count noise perspective, Seattle, Arrowhead, those are the hardest places to play. So with a silent count, with a fresh new offensive line, against a top 10 defense, with an all-pro pass rusher, what did you think was going to happen? It takes offensive lines time to gel. And I wish I could say I'm surprised by this, but I'm not. I'm not surprised by some of the struggles with the offensive line, and I'm not surprised by the fan reaction. But I actually think the offensive line has been okay, given the circumstances. Road game, rookie quarterback at Denver, silent count, and then last week against the Rams with a backup tackle. Now, I think there are some mistakes that have been made, and that is where I get more upset at Bill Callahan with personnel decisions that he may or may not have influenced than I do with how they're playing. But this was always going to take time. The left tackle had never played with the left guard before. The center was coming back from an Achilles tear and hasn't played football in 10 months. The right guard has never played with the center, nor has he ever played with the right tackle, and the right tackle has never played right tackle in the NFL. And yet you just thought this group was going to right away go out there and dominate? I forget when Paul said this, PK, but he said this at some point in the offseason where he said something along the lines of, I don't need to hear they need time to gel. And I laughed because it's such an unrealistic expectation, and Paul should know better. Fans, I get it. Paul, not so much. Offensive lines do take time to gel. That would be like saying, I want Cam Ward to be Tom Brady today. That's an unrealistic expectation. I want Cam to throw for more than 200 yards. But be Mahomes today? Come on now. And it's impossible unless you play your offensive line in the preseason an extensive amount, which no coach does. It is impossible to get your offensive line ready for game action in the offseason and training camp. Because the truth is, the owners never want to give the players in a negotiation anything that involves them giving up money. The owners always want more. So when it comes to the collective bargaining agreement in the NFL, the league goes after things that make them money. A 17th game makes them money. Thursday night football makes them money. International games make them money. In exchange for doing that, the players get things that don't cost the owners any money, like the ability to smoke marijuana. And most importantly, practice time. No more two-a-days, limited number of padded practices, no hitting in the offseason. You just can't practice offensive line play anymore. So the only way to get your offensive line in shape and to get them cohesive and to get it rolling is to play the games. That's it. And I knew this all offseason. I said, Brian Callahan's got two choices. He can do what no other coach in the league, of the 31 other coaches, nobody else was doing this, but he could say, hey, we're going to play our offensive line a half in the first preseason game, we're going to play them 3/4 in the second preseason game, and we're going to play them a full game in the last preseason game so they can get all these live reps and snaps together. Now, somebody twists an ankle, and all of a sudden you look like an idiot, but that is something he could have done. Again, nobody else in the league would have done that. Or you take the requisite time it takes to gel. Secondly, I agree with Callahan. I don't think all these sacks are on the offensive line. Now, I think John Ojukwu stinks, but I don't think all these sacks are on the offensive line. I don't think the 11 sacks like, oh, God, on the strip sack. I saw somebody put out a picture where there's a receiver running wide open, but Cam's not looking, so Cam's waiting for something else to develop before he throws the ball in. Ball's got to come out quick. Yesterday, did you guys watch Baker Mayfield play last night when he had two backup tackles in there? Baker knew he had two backup tackles against Will Anderson and Jonathan Grenard. So he knew ball has to come out quickly. I have to immediately get out of the pocket or I'm going to get sacked. He knew it. Well, Cam doesn't have 7 years experience in the NFL. Now, this is where I am down on the offensive line. And Bill Callahan. And that was the inexplicable decision to play John Ojukwu at right tackle on Sunday. And the awful explanation that Brian Callahan gave after the game to play Ojukwu, which was, well, he's from a preparation standpoint, he knows what we want to do the best. Dude, he was on the practice squad. He was on the team last year. You knew he stunk last season. You knew he stunk this season when you cut him after training camp. And he was no better than fourth as far as right tackle was concerned before the Denver game. After J.C. Latham, after Ole Udoa, And after Brandon Crenshaw Dixon, so 2 weeks ago he was 4th on the depth chart, and now he's the starter? That's a joke. And this is where I think the Titans have screwed up. I think they've given Bill Callahan way too much leeway in making decisions. He's not the head coach. He's not the general manager. And he never was. He's the offensive line coach. They gave Bill Callahan too much of a voice in the room, which I think was an issue that Rand Carthon really had, which was, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to ask you all what I should do. And then when it doesn't work, I'll just say, well, I asked you all what I should do instead of actually doing the work myself. But they let Bill Callahan call too many shots. The one that really bothers me, there are two that just really bother me. The one that really bothers me was the J.C. Latham pick at 7 overall, with no proof of concept that he could play left tackle. And as soon as they took him at 7, immediately Diana Rossini reported, well, that's the guy that Bill Callahan likes the most. And I kept saying, you're taking a right tackle with the 7th overall pick? What? And it's like, no, Jared, he's going to play left tackle. And even the fans said, he's going to play left tackle? I said, no, he's not going to play left tackle. Nick Saban doesn't want him playing left tackle, and I think Nick Saban knows football, so I'm going to go with that. And they said, but Bill Callahan! And I'm like, oh, fuck. Well, how can I argue with that? How can I argue with Bill Callahan? The other thing, and so that, I thought it was a disaster. They were going to take a tackle. They were going to take Alter Latham. Alt went off the board. They took Latham. I thought they should have taken Bowers. Who knows who was right, but the idea of, well, Bill Callahan likes him, take him with the 7th pick. Right, but what does Bill Callahan know about the tight end? Because that's what you're doing. Would you rather have him? Would you rather have the tight end? Would you rather have the receiver? Would you rather have him? But the one where I think they also screwed up on, and again, I think this was a Bill Callahan thing, is I think they whiffed on Lloyd Cushenberry. I think Lloyd Cushenberry kind of stinks. I think they gave Lloyd Cushenberry that big contract, not because like Dan Moore Jr., he was the only guy in the market. He wasn't. But because he was a bigger player, as in fatter, than Tyler Biadasz, the other center who was on the market coming from Dallas, who went to Washington for a lesser contract. Tyler Biadasz was a better player in Dallas than Lloyd Cushenberry was in Denver. And Tyler Biadasz is a better player in Washington than Lloyd Cushenberry is in Tennessee. So I know we talk about the investment on the line. I think the context is important. Dan Moore, I think, is going to be fine. He's not going to be good. He's not going to be great, but he's not going to be Andre Dillard. I think eventually he'll be fine. I think Skoronski will be an above-average guard, which is good. Not good for the 11th overall pick, but good enough. Kevin Zeitler will get it figured out. He's a veteran. He's been successful. And I do think if J.C. Latham can get healthy, and I don't know how bad this hip injury is, but if J.C. Latham can get healthy, I think J.C. Latham will be one of the top right tackles in the league. Like, he won't be Penei Sewell, but he'll be pretty damn good. But I think Cushenberry might be a problem. And again, I think that was a Bill Callahan decision. The other guy was better, but Bill Callahan wanted the bigger guy because that's how Bill wants him. And I thought this for some time. And so when Blake Bedingfield, the former Titans director of college scouting, wrote at Paul Kaharski this week that one of his biggest concerns was about Bill Callahan, and he wrote, quote, offensive line coach Bill Callahan's decisions with the offensive line personnel are an issue for this team. He seems to have made multiple bad choices in the past 2 seasons. Advocating for the trade of Leroy Watson and signing Sadiq Charles, who are no longer on the team, and drafting J.C. Latham as a left tackle in round 1, who they quickly moved to right tackle in year 2. A big negative was trusting Nicholas Petit-Frere, a.k.a. PT. Trusting Nicholas Petit-Frere as a starter at right tackle despite his failed years there before he arrived. Boy, I wonder who said don't do that. Not Joe Rexrode. Not anybody else in town. Just me. In year 2, Blake continues to write at paulkarski.com. He was on board with the signing of Dan Moore, and he struggled with penalties and giving up sacks, only to have a left tackle that is penalty-prone and given up multiple sacks. When Latham was injured in week 1, he played Oli Udoa in his place. In week 2, he started John Ojukwu at that spot, completely changing his mind in 1 week. The offensive line still struggles with depth and consistent play. I agree with Blake on pretty much all fronts. The only one I don't is I'm willing to give Dan Moore Jr. the benefit of the doubt and some time. And before you sit here and you tell me about how good Dan Moore is or isn't, let me just say this. Or about how you don't need any time with the offensive line, let me just say this. In 2019, the Titans' offensive line was a disaster for the first 6 weeks of the season. And then 3 things changed. Number 1, Taylor Lewan returned after 4 games. And he and Roger Saffold, and it took Saffold some time. I remember Saffold sent out a tweet and said, I'm the most hated player on the team. Because the Titans spent all this money on Roger Saffold, and he stunk at the beginning. And then Nate Davis returned from injury. That was the second thing. And the third thing was Ryan Tannehill started getting the ball out on time. And they went right to the top of the list in the league when it came to offensive lines. I'm not saying that's going to happen here. I think this offensive line is going to be fine. And again, I don't think all the sacks are on the offensive line. The problem for me is that I just think that no matter what we say about, hey, we'll be patient, or we think about, everybody's decided that, hey, we spent all the money, we should be good. It's week 2. It's week 2. It'll be fine. I actually think the line will be okay. On Sunday against the Colts, though, I do worry if they keep putting John Ojukwu back in there, what it is going to look like. Drake says, my thing with Bill Callahan is, yes, he's a good coach, highly regarded, etc., but they treat him like he's hands down the best O-line coach in league history. I mean, he's a pretty good line coach. And again, I think he's great if you just let him be the line coach. When you let him be GM and you don't take Brock Bowers because Bill Callahan thinks J.C. Latham can play left tackle. Remember, every coach thinks, I can coach him. Every coach thinks it. Every one of these offensive play callers with their tight pants and their lattes, they all think every play they're about to call is going to be a touchdown. Who was it? I think it was Dave Portnoy. Again, I'm not a Barstool guy, but I'm actually kind of starting to enjoy Portnoy a little bit. Dave Portnoy put out there that I guess he talked to Kevin O'Connell at a Kenny Chesney concert. And Kevin O'Connell said J.J. McCarthy is going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Of course. Kevin O'Connell thinks I can coach him. Because, again, they all think that. They all think I can coach everybody. And it's the general manager's job to sit there and say, I don't know about that. So I do want to get to some college football, but I do want to get to this in the chat. I just saw this. Bring Joe Rexrode on for Jared versus Joe. I asked him to come on the podcast, and he said he is too cowardly to ask to get me on. Go get him, Jared. So I'm going to say this. The reason I have not asked Joe to come on the show for a little Jared versus Joe, the reason I have not asked Joe to come on the program is because I did not want to put anybody at 102.5 in the position of where they'd get yelled at from management for coming on the show. I mean, if we get into Jared versus Joe, that might cover up celebrity birthdays. And I don't want anybody to get in trouble for that. So I haven't asked anybody. But if Joe wants to come on, it's a free country. I'll text Joe right now. In fact, I got my phone out right here. I'll text Joe right now here on the program because Kaharski is being a little high maintenance about the Stillman versus Kaharski stuff. But I'm going to text Joe right now, and I'm going to say, Joe, word on the street is that you want to do Jared versus Joe on the pod. Question mark. By the way, Caroline's coming on the pod tomorrow for whatever that is worth. Joe says celebrity birthdays. Nobody's watching that. I'll put it to you like this. I had more people waiting before this show started. Never mind. I'll just leave it at that. I texted Joe, so we do have that. Caroline will be on tomorrow, by the way. Also, guys, stop creeping on the YouTube chat when Caroline's on. It was weird last time. And, not that she cares and not that I care, but it's just weird. Okay. So I do want to talk about college football here for a second. Yesterday was a Titans Monday. And I want to talk about Vanderbilt and Tennessee. So Tennessee loses a heartbreaker on Saturday to Georgia, and Vanderbilt kicks South Carolina square in the rear end. And I feel like both fan bases are feeling good. I know Tennessee lost, and it was a heartbreaking Tennessee loss, which there have only been about 9,000 of those in my lifetime. But I don't think Tennessee fans expected the game to be like that at Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt should feel good about their performance. And I think they also should feel a little slighted. They went to South Carolina on Saturday, who was ranked as the 11th best team in the country, and absolutely kicked the crap out of them. And yet, now they're only ranked 20th in the country? Why? LSU is third, and they had to win a dogfight against Florida in which the coach had to defend the win after the game was over. And Florida sucks. FSU crushed a team everybody thought was good in Alabama. And guess what? FSU is 7th now. Are we sure? Forget about name recognition and program prestige and everything that Nick Saban did. Are we sure that smoking Alabama at home is better than beating South Carolina on the road? Are we sure of that? Georgia Tech beat 2-loss Clemson with a buzzer beater, with a field goal at the end, and they're ranked ahead of Vanderbilt. And yes, Vanderbilt beat South Carolina mostly without Lenora Sellers at quarterback, who was the number one reason that South Carolina was ranked 11th in the country coming into the game. I got it. But it's not like Vanderbilt was losing that game when Lenora Sellers went out. And you can only play who the other team puts at quarterback. Vanderbilt has gone on the road and dominated 2 Power 5 teams in the second half each of the last 2 weeks. Everybody loves Penn State with those incredibly impressive wins over Nevada, FIU, and Villanova. The reality when it comes to ranking, and I've been an AP poll voter before, so I know something about that. But the reality is, when it comes to these rankings, it's about brand. Florida State has a better brand than Vanderbilt. And Alabama has a better brand than South Carolina. So when Florida State crushes Alabama because Florida State has a better brand than Vanderbilt, and these voters think, well, South Carolina might be good. There's no way. South Carolina might be, or Vanderbilt might not be, or we can't say that about Vanderbilt. Florida State might be good. 7th. Vandy goes on the road, smokes South Carolina. Oh, no, it's because South Carolina sucks. Oh, no, it's because South Carolina didn't have their quarterback. Okay, they're out of the rankings. Alabama didn't fall out of the rankings after they got their ass handed to them because they're Alabama. Notre Dame is 0-2. And they are still ranked in the poll. Why? Because of Notre Dame. So is Vanderbilt for real? With a question mark. And I think it depends on what your definition of for real is. Are they a playoff contender? We'll see. But they're one of the top 15 teams in the country, in my opinion. And when 12 teams get in, if you're one of the top 15 teams, then you are a contender. It's as simple as that. But in the end, this is probably best for Vanderbilt and Clark Lee. They should feel slighted. They should have felt slighted about the fact that they went on the road to Virginia Tech, gave up 4 first downs and scored 5 touchdowns in the second half, and not one person across the country noticed. They should take it as a slight that they beat South Carolina and really embarrassed them on Saturday night, and all the talk after the game, really, when you look at the AP poll, was South Carolina is out of the poll. They must stink. Not, hey, Vanderbilt might actually be good. And just the belts to asses that I have seen from Vanderbilt the last 2 weeks makes me think Vanderbilt might be good. So what's great for Vanderbilt and great for Clark Lee is that he can tell his team we're being disrespected. They played Georgia State this week. No rat poison there. They lost to them last year. So they'll be 5-0. They'll go on the road to Tuscaloosa. Alabama will be ranked very, very highly. And guess what? That week, College Game Day will go to Miami at Florida State because that's what they do. Better brands. And Vanderbilt can still play the disrespect card. So I think Vanderbilt being ranked 20th in the AP poll is a joke. I think they're a top 15 team. Now to Tennessee. So I guess I personally am having a hard time trying to figure out, okay, was the choke job on Saturday, was that actually good for the Vols? Was it a moral victory? Was it a good game? Was it a... And it depends, I guess, on what your opinion of this Tennessee team is or what your expectations and hopes are. I felt like there were a lot of people that were celebrating the loss to Georgia as if it were a moral victory. And I get it. Nobody expected Tennessee to be good after the whole Nico fiasco. And Tennessee absolutely had Georgia on the ropes. Again, the problem is that they got Billy from the 8th grade to go out there to try to make a field goal in front of 110,000 people. And he choked. When I heard Holly Rowe say on the broadcast, yeah, he's been doing his breathing exercises. I thought, oh no. I thought, uh-oh. I'm like, that's bad. So, when it comes to Tennessee, you can say that's a good thing because you didn't think they were going to be good. But the reality is, for me, when it comes to college football, all that matters is how many games you win and how many games you lose. That's all they care about. It's kind of disappointing. It's kind of embarrassing. It's kind of annoying. It's all about how many games did you lose. It's never about who did you beat, which is really unfair because Tennessee's schedule actually makes me think they can make the playoff because they just have to win 2 or 3 games against Bama, Oklahoma, and Vanderbilt. And they should be favored in at least 2 of those 3 games. Win those 2, and you are in. Simple as that. Vandy doesn't have that schedule. They have to play LSU. They have to play Missouri. They have to play Texas. Although I don't know if Texas can complete a pass. So I'm just saying, I mean, I guess it was a good thing. I don't know. You had Georgia on the ropes. And if you win that game, you probably are going to the playoff. So I don't know how missing a kick and blowing a game like that can be a good thing. But it does feel like there are a lot of teams out there that would kill to be in Tennessee's shoes. And there's a lot of Tennessee fans out there that I think feel pretty good about their team after watching what happened against Georgia on Saturday. The one thing that I definitively take away from the game is that Nico Iamaleava sucked. And this is something Joe and I got into an argument about today because I heard Joe blaming Nico's agent and blaming Nico's dad, again, for the terrible decision that Nico made, which I think is ridiculous. Nico is a grown-ass man. And if Nico had a clue, he would have told his dad and his agent, hey, I think you guys are kind of out over your skis on this one. I think we should stay at Tennessee for the money we've already agreed to. So I blame Nico for that. And it's been a disaster. But Joey Aguilar is better than Nico. He is better than Nico. And Deshaun Foster, the guy who I guess went after Nico and gave up on Joey Aguilar, he's already been fired. It kind of reminds me of CBS. And I was thinking about CBS on Saturday when Tennessee, Georgia went to overtime. And I thought, the reason Tennessee, Georgia is on ABC is because CBS did not want to pay $300 million for that game. Instead, CBS paid $350 million in order to show USC versus Purdue. Did anybody watch that game? So, decision makers, smart people, just wasting money at CBS, just like these teams that think, no, Nico's better than Joey Aguilar. He's not. Joey Aguilar is the next Hendon Hooker. Now, is he going to be as good as Hendon Hooker? Probably not. But he's the next regular Joe Schmo quarterback that Josh Heupel can turn into a 400 yards a game passer because of the offense. Nico couldn't do that because Nico sucks. But Heupel can do it with just a regular Joe Schmo quarterback. Like, what would Josh Heupel have done with Jordan Rodgers as his starting? He would have turned him into Aaron Rodgers. And then he would have gone to the pros in the second round and he would have stunk. So I got to say, the big takeaway I had from Saturday was, man, Nico sucked. They were winning last year in spite of Nico. Herbie's on the broadcast talking about last year they used to run the ball all the time with Dylan Sampson. Yeah, because they had to. That's why. Joe Rexrode has responded. As far as the Jared versus Joe thing is concerned, DJ from Nashville asked, has Joe replied? Yes, Joe has replied. Joe has replied and asks, how much do you pay? That sounds like a cop-out, doesn't it? Joe saying, no, I want a check to come on the Stillman and Company program. But that's on you. And finally, I want to get to one other thing today because I do think that somebody has crossed the Rubicon into what I consider to be franchise quarterback territory. And that was Baker Mayfield last night. I do have a major thought about the doubleheader last night, and no, it has nothing to do with Tom Brady being in the Raiders coaching box with a headset on, and people, after seeing it, they now seem to understand, yeah, there is kind of a conflict of interest with an owner of an NFL team calling games on TV and meeting with players and coaches in the production meeting. But I already knew that. That wasn't anything special to me. But the first game of the doubleheader, Tampa Bay on the road at Houston, I think Baker Mayfield crossed the Rubicon and became a franchise quarterback. Whatever your definition of high-end, elite franchise quarterback is, that's what I think Baker Mayfield became last night. Yes, Baker is in his third year in Tampa, and he is firmly entrenched as the starting quarterback. And yes, Baker has had the Bucs in the playoffs in each of the last 2 years. And it's not as if Baker threw for 500 yards. He threw for 215 and 2 touchdowns. But the difference between Baker, who I now think is a franchise quarterback, an ace of a starting pitcher, and say Jared Goff, a guy you can win a lot of games with, is that Jared Goff needs help. Last night, Tampa played Houston on the road with 2 backup tackles. Their right tackle last night was a center last season. And I don't think you Titan fans out there, I don't think you need to know how difficult it is to play with backup tackles. And it's not as if Houston doesn't have great edge rushers. On one side, they have the 3rd overall pick in the draft, and on the other, they have a guy making $19 million a year. Baker's number 2 receiver, Chris Godwin, is still hurt. Baker has a new offensive coordinator, and I'll be damned if Baker's special teams didn't try to just hand the game to the Texans last night with a blocked punt and a punt return that set up fourth quarter scores. And yet last night, with the game on the line, Baker Mayfield delivered. Of those 215 yards Baker threw for, 63 came on the final drive when once again Houston knew Tampa had to throw and they could pin their ears and come back after Baker. Baker on 3rd and 10 had a beautiful throw dropped by Emeka Ibuka and then scrambled for 15 on 4th down. He won them that game. He put the team on his back. Jalen Hurts plays every game with 2 $20 million tackles and 2 $30 million wide receivers and the best running back in the NFL. Baker doesn't have any of that. And my definition of a franchise quarterback is like the Supreme Court's definition of art versus pornography. I know it when I see it. To me, a franchise quarterback can carry a team to victory. He can carry a team to the playoffs and maybe even carry a team to a Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes carries the Chiefs. Again, no disrespect to Jalen Hurts, but how much of a driver is he compared to how much of a passenger is he? Baker doesn't have those 2 tackles or Saquon Barkley. And Baker's best option, Mike Evans, drew one of the best corners in the league last night. And yet, by scrambling, by throwing to the tight end, Baker found a way. Because that's what franchise quarterbacks do. When the going gets tough in the fourth quarter, They roll up their sleeves and they find a way. The things that for years have been the bugaboo for Kirk Cousins. Well, Baker's a little bit better than that. And I know Baker Mayfield failed in Cleveland, and I know he failed in Carolina, and he had that stint with the Rams. But guess what? Tampa Bay has a 30-year-old franchise quarterback. And if I had to put Baker on the list, he would be number 7 behind the 4 obvious best quarterbacks in the league in whatever order you want to put them. Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, and Lamar Jackson. Matthew Stafford, I think, is on the list because he can still carry a team, even though he's older. And Jaden Daniels because he just seems special, but I'm still a little iffy on Jaden Daniels. But Baker's number 7 to me, which is pretty impressive for a guy that Cleveland got rid of and Carolina cut. And doesn't mean he isn't one now. 7 years into the league. And again, carrying his team to victory. You may not like it, but I'm just telling you, Baker Mayfield, in my opinion, is now a franchise quarterback. The thing that you all have been searching desperately for since Steve McNair got locked out of the building. That's going to do it for us. Again, like and subscribe to this program. We're now up over 1,000 subscribers, but keep them coming. Everybody subscribe. Tell your friends. Everybody subscribe. Listen to the podcast. Listen wherever you do. Apple, Spotify, Amazon. It's all up there. We will have that up there by at least 4 o'clock Central Time today. We'll get it up there as soon as we're done. That's it for us. Like and subscribe. Stillman & Company live 440 Sports on YouTube at Stillman & Co. tomorrow at 2 o'clock. And the podcast will for sure be up by 4 o'clock. We will see everybody tomorrow.